On a winter night in Denver in 1877, a woman in silk and jet beads sat behind a locked door on Holiday Street and counted a stack of banknotes thicker than the marshal's monthly salary. She owned 3 buildings on that block. She would bury 2 husbands and outlast every sheriff in the county. Her name was Mattie Silks. Hollywood never made a single film about her. Tonight, we are going to the real record. 20 truths about what it actually meant to be a madam on the American frontier. And by the end, I am going to answer one question that the movies never even thought to ask. Who held the real power in a frontier town? Hold that thought. The answer is not the one you expect. Now, before we go any further, tap that subscribe button. The deeper we go, the more disturbing the truth becomes. We are not going to the movies for this. We are going to county deed records, city council minutes, census rolls, court filings, and the newspapers that printed real names the morning after. The towns that Hollywood built on a soundstage were real places with real economies, and in those economies, the saloon was the engine. Anywhere men outnumbered women 10 or 20 to 1, and that was nearly everywhere west of the Missouri. In the 1860s and 70s, a particular kind of market took root. And the person who ran the most profitable room in that market was not the bartender. She was the madam. The documented record of what she actually did, what she owned, who she controlled, and how much influence she held looks nothing like the soft focus character in the satin dress with the sad eyes. The women in the actual record were harder, sharper, and more powerful than anything the costume department ever dreamed up. And when the towns they built decided to clean up and go respectable, the very first thing they did was pretend these women had never existed. So let us start at the bottom with the truth that cracks the legend open at its foundation and work our way up to the one nobody saw coming. Number 20. Most madams were not former prostitutes. The Hollywood version has every madam starting as a working girl who climbed the ranks. The census records say otherwise. A significant number were widows. Others were wives abandoned by men who went west and never came back. Some had run boarding houses or laundries and watched the money walk through the saloon doors night after night until they understood where the real demand was. In a world with no safety net and almost no legal work for women beyond washing, sewing, or teaching, they looked at an open market and they filled it. This was not a fall from grace. It was a business decision made with cold eyes and no alternatives. The frontier did not hand women a list of acceptable careers. It handed them poverty or invention. And the women who chose invention were not the ones the school books wanted to remember. Josephine Hensley, known in Helena, Montana, as Chicago Joe, arrived in 1867. She was a Civil War widow from New York, carrying a small stake of money and no connections in the territory. Within 2 years, she owned a hurdy-gurdy house on Wood Street. Within 10, she was one of the wealthiest people in all of Montana Territory. She did not stumble into that. She built it, ledger line by ledger line, in a town full of men who underestimated her every single day. Number 19. They kept meticulous financial records. These were not chaotic rooms run on impulse and whiskey. They were organized operations with account books, payroll systems, and supply chains for liquor, linens, candles, food, firewood, and medicine. Madams tracked credit extended to minors by name and amount. They logged payments received, wages owed to employees, and fines paid to the city at regular intervals. The surviving ledgers from houses in Colorado and Nevada read like the books of a well-managed hotel. Every dollar in and every dollar out, recorded in careful handwriting, in an era when most general stores and even some banks kept sloppy records at best. If a minor owed a debt from 3 months back, The madam had the page and the figure ready before he sat down. These women did not guess at their profits. They counted every cent. And those records, the ones that survived barn fires and estate sales and deliberate destruction, are the reason we know any of this at all. Number 18. Madams paid more in fines and taxes than most legitimate businesses in town. And here is where the real arrangement comes into focus. The fine system was never intended as punishment. It was a licensing scheme that every party understood. A madam appeared before the judge at regular intervals, pleaded guilty to a nominal charge, paid the set amount, and walked back to work before lunch. The city depended on this revenue and budgeted for it accordingly. In Tombstone in the early 1880s, monthly fines on the houses ran between $12 and $16 per woman. Steady, predictable income that the city council counted on, the same way a modern county counts property tax. In Dodge City, the fines from the district helped pay the salary of the very lawmen assigned to keep it orderly. In some smaller mining camps where the mine payroll was seasonal and unpredictable, the madam's fine was the only reliable revenue the town had for months at a time. The town did not want her gone. It wanted her paying on schedule. Number 17. They enforced hygiene and health standards decades before any government office did. The better houses required weekly medical inspections by whatever doctor the town had available. They mandated bathing for workers and turned away visibly sick customers at the door without apology or exception. A madam who let sickness spread through her house would lose her workforce in weeks, her paying regulars within a month, and her reputation for good. The health measures inside a managed parlor house predated any municipal public health authority in most frontier towns by a full generation. Today, we have entire federal agencies dedicated to public health regulation, funded by billions of dollars. In 1875, in a mining camp with no running water, no sewer, and no doctor closer than a 2-day ride, a woman with a wash basin and a posted set of rules was the only health system for miles in any direction. She did not have a medical degree. She had common sense and a profit motive. And the combination worked better than nothing, which was the only alternative anyone had. Number 16. Many of them owned entire city blocks. Madams did not rent their rooms and hope for the best. They bought the building. Then they bought the one next door. Then the lot across the alley. Mattie Silks accumulated multiple properties along Market Street in Denver over the course of 3 decades. Chicago Joe assembled a commercial block in Helena that included storefronts, rental rooms, and a variety theater. In San Francisco, several Chinese and white madams held deeds to buildings in areas that would later become some of the most valuable real estate in the state. Property was one of the very few forms of legal standing available to women in the 19th century. Under coverture law, a married woman's possessions belonged to her husband, but a single woman or a widow could hold a deed in her own name. These women understood that a signed deed was worth more than any promise, any handshake, or any man's word, so they collected deeds the way other people collected debts, and every deed they signed made them harder to remove. Number 15. They dressed like any prosperous woman of the era, not like Hollywood costumed them. The satin corset and feather boa of the movies is a fabrication invented by set designers who needed the audience to know at a glance who was respectable and who was not. Surviving photographs of real madams show high-collared dresses, dark fabrics, careful tailoring, and the same modest styles worn by the banker's wife or the merchant's daughter walking the same street. Looking respectable was not vanity. It was strategy. A madam who looked like a caricature would not have been welcome in the bank, the land office, or the dry goods store. She needed all three to keep her operation running. Diamond Jessie Heyman of San Francisco was known for the quantity and quality of her diamonds, but she wore them over dresses that would have passed at any respectable gathering in the city. The diamonds were not decoration, they were portable wealth, an asset she could carry on her person and convert to cash within the hour if a raid, a fire, or a rival forced her to leave town before the sun came up. Remember, we have not reached the real power on this list yet. That is still building. Number 14. They provided the only functioning safety net for women in frontier towns. When a woman was beaten by a husband or left with children and no money after a mine collapse, or stranded by a man who simply rode out one morning and never came home, there was no government office to visit, no charity ward, no women's shelter, no church fund with money enough to feed a family for more than a single day. In many towns, the madam's house was the only door a desperate woman could knock on and expect to find a meal, a bed, and someone who understood her situation without judgment or sermon. Madams took women in. They fed them and sheltered them. Many went to work in the house, but madams also loaned money for stage fare out of town. They arranged passage to family in other states. And in court records from Denver and Helena, there are instances of madams appearing before a judge to testify on behalf of women who had been beaten or robbed by men the law had no interest in pursuing. It was not a clean arrangement. Nobody would call it ideal, but in a place where the alternative was starvation or the open street in January, it was the only system that existed. And the women who ran it did not wait for anyone's permission or approval to act. Number 13. Violence against women inside a well-run house was punished on the spot. By the madam, not by the marshal. A man who raised his hand to a woman in one of these establishments was thrown into the street by the doorman, beaten if he resisted, and banned permanently. His name went on a list that every employee could see. He did not come back. The rule was not sentimental. It was economic. An injured worker could not earn. A second injury might keep her from working for weeks. And a reputation for rough customers drove away the steady, well-paying regulars and attracted the kind of trouble that brought the marshal down on everyone. Madams employed bouncers, armed doormen, and in several documented cases, off-duty deputies who understood that keeping order inside the house was part of the arrangement the whole town depended on. The rules were posted where every man who walked through that door could read them, and enforcement was immediate and final. No second chances, no excuses accepted. In a time when the law gave a husband the legal right to discipline his wife, the madam's house was one of the few places on the frontier where a man faced consequences for raising his hand to a woman. Number 12. They operated credit systems that most banks of the era could not match for reliability. When a miner walked into town with gold dust in a leather pouch and no access to a bank, because there might not be a bank for 100 miles in any direction, the madam extended credit. She tracked the balance in her own ledger. She collected when the money came in. And if the money did not come, she held collateral. Some madams weighed gold dust on their own scales, kept behind the bar or in a locked back office. Others accepted livestock, saddles, tools, or even mining claims as security against a running tab. The financial records that survive from these operations show a level of discipline and consistency that would have impressed any Eastern banker of the same period. Today, a phone in your pocket connects you to every financial institution on Earth. In 1870, in a Nevada mining camp with no telegraph and no postal route, the only person who could extend a line of credit, keep an honest ledger, and collect on what was owed was the woman behind the desk in the parlor house. And every man in that camp knew it. Number 11. They bankrolled the very institutions that later disowned them. When Virginia City needed a volunteer fire company, Julia Bulette was among the first donors. She gave money, she gave blankets and supplies, and the company made her an honorary member. Engine Company Number 1. The only woman they ever honored that way in that town. When she was murdered in January of 1867, strangled in her bed by a drifter named John Mullane, who wanted her furs and her diamonds. Her funeral procession filled the main street of Virginia City from one end to the other. The fire company led it in full dress. The Metropolitan Brass Band played behind them. The Territorial Enterprise reported it as one of the largest public funerals the city had ever seen. The men who walked behind her coffin knew exactly who she was, what she did for a living, and exactly what she had given to their town. But when the city wrote its official history a generation later, her name was nowhere in it. That pattern repeated across the entire West. When a frontier town needed a church, a schoolhouse, or a hospital, the donation rolls often included money from the district, sometimes recorded under a name, sometimes accepted quietly through a middleman with no acknowledgement at all. The towns took the money. Every single time they took the money. And when the buildings were finished and the paint was dry, they forgot who paid for the lumber. The steeple went up. The bell rang on Sunday morning. And the woman whose money bought the bell sat 3 blocks away, unwelcome in the pew. Number 10. Many had long, stable relationships that lasted decades. The lonely, broken woman drinking alone in the back of the saloon is a movie invention designed to make the audience feel sorry for her just long enough to move the plot forward. Mattie Silks shared her life with a man named Cortez Thompson for the better part of 30 years. The relationship had its storms, and Thompson was not always a reliable man. But it endured longer than most frontier marriages, where death, distance, and disappearance ended unions constantly. Laura Evans of Salida, Colorado, operated her house for over 50 years and was a recognized, familiar figure in the community for her entire adult life. She was not hiding. She was not ashamed. She walked the same streets as everyone else, and they nodded to her on the sidewalk. Some madams were legally married. Others were in common law partnerships that neighbors, employees, and even local officials accepted without question. They loved, they quarreled, they buried people they cared about, and they carried on. The same as every other person trying to hold a life together on hard ground in a country that was still being invented. Number 9. The red light district was drawn by the city, not by the women who worked in it. The line, the boundary of the tolerated district, was a zone warning decision made in a council chamber by elected officials who understood exactly what they were doing and why. The madams did not choose their location. The town assigned it. City officials drew the borders, posted the rules, collected the fines, and enforced the geography with the marshal's office. The ordinances are still in the municipal archives of Dodge City, Abilene, Tombstone, and Deadwood. You can read them yourself. When a town later decided to shut the district down, the same council members who had drawn that line and counted that revenue for years stood up in public and blamed the women for corrupting the morals of the community. The council minutes from those exact same meetings, where the fines were approved and the budgets balanced with district money, tell a very different story. The town created the system. The town profited from the system. And when the system became inconvenient, the town blamed the women it had placed there by ordinance. And now the list begins to climb into territory the legend never touches. Number 8. Racial hierarchy was enforced inside the district with the same cruelty as outside it. The red light districts were segregated by race, by price, and by street. White madams ran the most expensive parlor houses on the best blocks. Chinese women, many of them sold or trafficked from Canton and held in conditions closer to slavery than employment, were confined to separate alleys under the control of Tong organizations that treated them as property to be rented out and replaced. Black women operated in designated blocks with lower prices, rougher rooms, and almost no legal protection of any kind. The system replicated every racial injustice of the broader society, and in many places sharpened them to a finer edge. Ah Toy arrived in San Francisco around 1849 and became one of the first Chinese women known to operate independently outside Tong control in the city. She appeared in court repeatedly. She sued clients who tried to pay her with brass filings instead of gold dust. She fought for her earnings in a legal system that was built to deny her any standing at all. The court records preserve her voice, one of the very few Chinese women's voices from Gold Rush San Francisco that survive in any official document anywhere. She won some of those cases. And the city spent the next 50 years trying to write her out of its memory anyway. Number 7. Madams were the most effective intelligence brokers on the frontier. Every powerful man in a cattle town or mining camp passed through the parlor at some point, and men in those rooms talked freely because they believed that what happened behind a closed door stayed there. They discussed land deals before the papers were filed. They revealed mining claims before the stakes were driven. They named political enemies, described business rivals in detail, and laid out plans they would never have spoken aloud in a courthouse or a crowded saloon. The madam heard all of it. She cataloged it, and she deployed it with precision to protect her operation, to block a hostile city official before he could move against her. To ensure the right candidate won an election, she could not vote in herself. She was running an information network fueled by the confidences of men who never stopped to consider that what they said at midnight might shape what happened at noon. This is not modern interpretation. Territorial correspondence from Montana and Colorado contains careful references to intelligence gathered through parlor house channels. The most valuable commodity in a frontier town was never gold or cattle or land. It was knowing what the man across the table was going to do before he did it. And no one in town collected that currency more skillfully than the woman pouring the whiskey and listening to every word. Number 6. They determined the outcome of local elections. Chicago Joe Hensley did not write a check and walk away. She organized voters. She opened her doors for political meetings when no other venue in town would host them. She extended credit to candidates who needed funds and made certain they understood exactly whose support had put them in office and what that support expected in return. In a territory where the margin of victory might be 20 or 30 votes, a madam who could direct a block of men who owed her money, favors, or discretion was the single most important political figure in town. She could not cast a ballot herself, but she could decide who won and who lost. Newspapers in Helena and Denver complained openly about the influence of the parlor houses on territorial politics. The editors were not inventing a scandal. They were describing a documented arrangement that the official histories of those same towns would quietly omit within a single generation. And still, the truth at the top of this list has not been spoken. We are almost there. Number 5. When madams died or retired, the towns they had helped build systematically erased them. Gravestones were pulled from cemeteries. City directories were edited and reprinted. Street names were changed. Buildings were torn down or given new histories that mentioned no previous owner. Donation records disappeared from church archives and civic files. The women who had funded fire companies and schoolhouses were removed from the public memory of those institutions as if they had never existed at all. Laura Evans served Salida, Colorado for over 50 years. She was a fixture of the town. Everyone knew her by name, and everyone knew her address. When the era of respectability arrived, the town began behaving as if she had never been there. Pearl DeVere of Cripple Creek died in June of 1897. The circumstances remain disputed. Poison, possibly self-administered, possibly given to her by someone who has never been identified. She was buried at the edge of town after a funeral that drew a sizable crowd. Within one generation, Cripple Creek had swept her from its story. Her name survived only because a handful of stubborn local historians refused to let the silence stand. Today, we talk about preserving history as a civic virtue, but on the frontier, erasing history was the civic project, and they were thorough about it. Number 4. The warm-hearted madam of the movies is a complete fabrication. The real women were calculating, fiercely competitive, and capable of a ruthlessness that would have unsettled a cattle baron. Mattie Silks and Jenny Rogers were rivals in Denver for the better part of 2 decades. Their competition was personal, expensive, and occasionally physical. Madams dismissed employees who broke house rules without a moment of hesitation or sentiment. They sued former partners in open court. They fought eviction attempts with lawyers, political connections, and sometimes threats that the surviving correspondence only hints at. They undercut competitors, guarded their territory, and punished disloyalty with the same cold efficiency any railroad magnate would have recognized. The movie version, the woman who smiles through tears and needs a good man to save her, would not have lasted a week in Mattie Silks' Denver. These women did not want your sympathy. They expected you to settle your account and mind your manners under their roof, and if you could not manage that, the doorman would show you the street. Number 3. Several madams accumulated more wealth than the richest men in their communities. Mattie Silks, at the height of her career, held Denver real estate worth more than the holdings of mine owners and cattlemen whose names filled the society pages. Diamond Jesse Heyman's jewel collection alone was valued at a figure that would have bought a comfortable working ranch in the Sacramento Valley. These were not women surviving on the margins of respectable life. They were among the most prosperous residents of their cities, operating in a market with extreme demand, constant cash flow, and almost no legitimate competition willing to enter it. While the general store owner waited on credit from a wholesaler back east, and the mine foreman waited on the assay office, the madam's revenue came through her door in gold and silver every single night. In a time when a working man earned $1 a day and a school teacher brought home perhaps $40 a month, these women managed revenues that rivaled the output of small mines. Today, the wealthiest women in the country are celebrated publicly, profiled in magazines, and ranked on annual lists. 150 years ago, the wealthiest woman in a frontier town was the one whose name the next generation scratched out of the record on purpose. Number 2. The most famous fictional madam in American literature was inspired by a real woman whose actual life dwarfed anything the novel contained. Belle Brazing of Lexington, Kentucky, is widely documented as the primary model for Belle Watling in Gone with the Wind. She operated one of the most well-known houses in the South for nearly 40 years. She maintained strict standards, managed a loyal staff, corresponded with prominent citizens, and navigated the complicated politics of a border state with a skill that most elected officials would have envied. She outlasted every legal challenge, every reform campaign, and every wave of public morality that tried to close her doors. Margaret Mitchell took a 4-decade career of extraordinary resilience and reduced it to a sentimental minor character who appears in a handful of scenes and exists only to make Rhett Butler look generous. The fiction made her small and pitiful. The actual record shows a woman who built an institution, defended it for decades against attack from every direction, and retired on her own terms with her finances intact. The real Belle Brazing deserved a novel of her own. She got a footnote in someone else's. Number 1. And here is the truth. I have been holding back since the opening line of this video. In many frontier towns, the madam was not merely the most powerful woman. She was the most powerful person. Walk back through every piece of evidence we have laid on the table tonight. She owned the buildings. She held the deeds in her own name. She knew every secret that mattered, because the men who carried those secrets spilled them in her own parlor over whiskey they bought on credit, she extended. She determined elections without casting a single ballot. She funded the fire company, the church, and the school. She ran a financial operation that half the town depended on. She paid more into the city treasury than most of the legitimate merchants on Main Street. And unlike the sheriff, nobody appointed her. Unlike the mayor, nobody could vote her out. Unlike the circuit judge, she did not ride away and vanish for months. She was there every single night in the same building, behind the same desk, keeping the same books. In a town of 300 souls with no established institutions, no reliable courts, and no permanent law beyond the marshal's revolver, the person who controlled the money, the information, and the relationships was the person who held the real authority. Town after town, decade after decade, the evidence points to the same conclusion. That person was the madam. And the reason you were never taught that is not because the record was lost. It is because someone decided you should not know. So who built the legend that buried these women? 3 groups shaped the lie, and each one did it for profit. First, the dime novelists and penny press writers of the 1870s and 80s. They could not sell a shrewd businesswoman who kept clean ledgers and bought property at auction. So they invented 2 stock characters, the angel with a tragic past and the fallen woman beyond redemption. Every madam became one or the other, and neither version had anything to do with the women in the court filings and the deed books. The dime novel cover, the weeping beauty in the low-cut gown leaning against a hitching post, sold 100,000 copies. The plain truth would not have sold 10. Second, the civic boosters and progressive-era reformers of the 1890s and early 1900s. When a frontier town decided it was ready to become respectable, the first item on the agenda was rewriting its own past. They demolished buildings. They renamed streets. They stripped names from donor rolls and church records. They purged city directories of any address connected to the old district. The cleanup was not accidental or gradual. It was organized, funded, and ruthlessly thorough. They wanted Eastern capital, respectable white families, and church steeples on the skyline, and the first person they removed from the picture was the woman who had paid for that skyline in the first place. Third, Hollywood. Beginning in the 1930s, the movie Madam became a permanent fixture of the Western genre. Heart of gold, mysterious past, soft lighting, sad music, and a fate designed to make the cowboy look noble by comparison. She existed on screen for one purpose, which was to be pitied and then forgotten by the time the credits rolled. An actress in a clean costume on a clean set, pretending to suffer in a room that never smelled like kerosene or tasted like dust. The real women would have walked out of that theater and never looked back. They would not have recognized a single frame of what was supposed to be their story. So here is my answer to the question I asked at the very start of this video. Who held the real power in a frontier town? The record points to the same answer everywhere I looked. It was the woman the town later tried to forget. She held more property than the banker. She knew more secrets than the sheriff. She moved more money through her parlor than most of the businesses on the main street combined. She kept the town running during the hard years when nobody else could or would. She buried friends, survived rivals, outlasted lawmen, and paid every fine the court demanded without missing a single one. And when the town decided to write its own history, it left her out on purpose. Somewhere in a county archive right now, in a leather-bound ledger nobody has opened in 100 years, a woman's handwriting records the week's accounts in clean, careful figures. She owned the building. She paid the taxes. She kept that town alive through hard winters that killed stronger men. And not one history book on the shelf of the county library mentions her name.